There's a new alliance flourishing that has the potential to damage American interests from the historic capitals of Western Europe to the bustling metropolises of East Asia. China, Russia, Iran and North Korea are increasingly pooling their resources, integrating their economies and collaborating on key technology to make them immune to pressures from the American-led NATO alliance. But can Beijing's alliance really threaten the American-led global order when its combined economic power is much smaller than that of the US and its allies? In this video, we'll take a look at alliances from the 20th century and we'll do a deep dive into China's current alliance. After watching this video, you'll understand that economic power is not as important as you might expect if the main objective of your alliance is to disturb the global order. You might even come to realize that China's chances of succeeding are much higher than you would have expected. No peacetime alliance has been so strong, effective and long-lasting as that of the Washington-led NATO alliance. Since World War II, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has created stable environments for its members that allowed them to develop into some of the most prosperous and developed countries in the world. Yet it's these same achievements and the lack of a real competitor in recent decades that make it really hard for the citizens of those countries to understand the threat that China's alliance might pose. Beijing and Moscow have a no-limit partnership. Moscow and Tehran are leveling up their military relationship. Pyongyang is supplying more shells to Moscow than NATO is supplying to Ukraine. Analysts are wondering whether these relationships might one day grow into a full-blown military alliance like NATO. It could, or not. But that's the wrong question to ask in my opinion. When we think of alliances, we usually think of a highly institutionalized and formal alliance structure among countries that provide each other with security guarantees. Something that resembles NATO, which includes a mutual defense clause like NATO's famous Article 5. Countries with genuine friendships that truly trust each other. But in order to understand the vast diversity of alliance options that exist, it's better to visualize them on a spectrum. Most alliances throughout history have looked nothing like NATO, but instead looked more like a Game of Thrones type of alliance that came about merely because it served a specific purpose for a certain amount of time, after which one party would inevitably betray the other. Let's look at two well-known alliances from the 20th century in order to better understand how wide the spectrum of alliances really is. The first example is the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that was signed in 1938 by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, a year before the start of World War II. The treaty was signed at a crucial phase for both Nazi Germany as well as the Soviets. The Germans were building up an army in order to invade Western Europe. They were investing heavily in the men and material that were necessary to occupy the countries around it, and so it needed to stabilize its eastern border. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty allowed Germany to focus all of its efforts on its western flank, without having to worry about a Soviet attack from the east. The countries in between the two were carved up and divided between the two. Stalin viewed the pact as a way to stabilize its western flank, while it built up a strong military in preparation for the next war. Nazi Germany and the Soviets did not get along very well. They didn't even have anything in common. In fact, the Nazis hated the communists. The treaty only came about because it was convenient for both parties. And as soon as Germany felt like it could do without the treaty, it stabbed the Soviets in the back and invaded their country. The alliance lasted for only 2 years, but it served an important role at the time. Without it, the Germans would probably never have been able to expand as far away as southern France, since it would have to split its forces between its eastern and its western flank, weakening both in the process.
Germany, Japan and Italy line up against communism. In Rome, the three-part pact is signed by Herr von Ribbentrop on behalf of Germany, by the Japanese ambassador Masaki Hotta, and by Count Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law and foreign minister.
The Tripartite Pact was a completely different kind of alliance that allied the Axis powers Germany, Japan and Italy together. The alliance was a way for them to join forces in order to fight a common enemy and create a new world order. Germany and Italy would establish a new order in Europe, while Japan would establish one in Greater Asia. Signatories were not necessarily obliged to come to each other's rescue like Article 5 of the NATO treaty facilitates, although it did have a defensive clause that was never invoked. An agreement was later added after they all declared war with the United States. that forbade any of the three powers from individually ending the war. The genius of this treaty lies in the fact that it spread out American forces across the globe. America had to sustain a war that spread out across all of Asia, while at the same time fighting Germany and Italy that had already taken most of Europe by the time America joined the party. That's the strength of alliances like these. They raise the cost of going to war by involving all of the signatories, compared to fighting with one of them individually. And so that's how much alliances can differ from the formal NATO-style alliance that includes deep cooperation and sympathy towards other signatories. Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union and the Japanese Empire just wanted to turn the world on its head and establish a new world order that suited them more. These alliances provide valuable insights into the alliance being forged by China at the moment. In a lot of ways, China's alliance is a much more advanced and versatile alliance compared to the World War II examples we just discussed. The geographic reality on the ground allows much deeper cooperation, trade opportunities, and relief from Western sanctions. Russia, China, and North Korea are all neighbors. They can trade sanctioned goods amongst each other without any interruptions. For example, Russia's trade with China has skyrocketed since its invasion of Ukraine, with Russia importing chips, cars, electronics, and all kinds of other goods that cannot be bought from the Western bloc anymore. North Korean weapons exports with Russia have exploded, with the DPRK providing Russia with millions of shells and rockets, allowing Russia to gain the upper hand in the Ukraine war. In the meantime, Iran is supplying Russia with its now well-known Shahed drones. Even though they're not technically neighbors, they only have to ship the goods across the Caspian Sea. That's what the recently launched North-South transport corridor is meant for. In exchange, Russia has reportedly committed to delivering advanced air defenses, fighter jets, and other capabilities to Iran, which could tip the delicate regional balance in Tehran's favor. Nazi Germany and the Japanese Empire could only dream of such cooperation. They had the whole Eurasian landmass in between them. But there's more. China and Russia are pursuing the joint development of helicopters, conventional attack submarines, missiles, and missile-launched early warning systems. All of these efforts point to the most important element of their alliance. Without their alliance, these revisionist powers would be completely isolated by the Western bloc, considering the heavy sanctions that have been imposed on them. Russia would not have the upper hand in Ukraine if it didn't have the North Korean shells and Iranian drones. Its society would grind to a halt if it didn't absorb all the energy that Russia couldn't sell to Western Europe anymore, or if it couldn't import all the mundane products that China is capable of supplying to keep Russia's society humming along. Without its alliance with China, Russia would have to waste much needed manpower on securing its eastern border. The Chinese-Russian border was once the most militarized border in the world. Now it's an empty wasteland, since there is a base level of trust between the two countries. Very similar to how the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact allowed Russia to only slightly guard its western border during World War II. China also benefits from a light troop presence on its border with Russia, allowing it to focus its efforts on the American positions in Asia. China and Russia don't necessarily need to fight shoulder to shoulder like NATO does, they can simply fight back to back. Have you ever noticed how young boys become more assertive when they have friends by their side? I know I was inclined to do more stupid stuff when I felt emboldened by my friend's presence. This dynamic also works on a macro level. China's revisionist allies are becoming more and more emboldened, with Russia invading Ukraine because it feels supported by China's no-limit friendship. Kim Jong-un is becoming more and more belligerent since he feels as though Putin needs him to supply ammunition to the Russian troops in Ukraine. Iran knows it can count on Russia if there's ever a showdown over its nuclear program, so since it has less to fear, it can become more assertive in the Middle East. The bigger the alliance, the stronger the participants feel, and the more the American global order erodes away. There's a sense among Western allies that these are just alliances of convenience which should break down at any moment. But I don't think that's the case, since they all share a common goal, creating a new world order that benefits them more. The more the West tries to push back with sanctions and other measures that are meant to isolate the revisionists, the more they feel the need to support each other. Anytime one of them is hit with sanctions, the alliance becomes stronger and even more interconnected, with its members lowering trade barriers amongst each other and collaborating on key technologies. For example, Russia reportedly provided China with state-of-the-art submarine quieting technologies. China's current submarines are relatively noisy, making them easy to spot by Western navies. When China's next generation submarines come online with this technology, it will undercut an important Western advantage in a domain where Western nations still have an edge. Likewise, South Korean officials fear that in return for supplying Russia with millions of shells, North Korea will receive key technologies that will support its fast developing space, nuclear and missile programs. As soon as countries supplement their exports with technology sharing, it becomes much harder for outside powers to estimate the capabilities of an adversary, raising the likelihood of miscalculations on the battlefield. The more countries cooperate, the bigger the threat they pose. That becomes an even more pronounced dilemma during a crisis. If Russia sends naval ships to the East China Sea during a US-China standoff over Taiwan, or if China and Russia send naval ships to the Arabian Gulf during a standoff between Iran and the US, they could make the battlefield much more complicated. A fight with one could lead to a fight with the whole alliance. I'm not saying these countries are willing to die for each other, but they're smart enough to understand that an American victory over one of them will leave the rest much weaker and vulnerable. And that's why I think that even though China's allies don't have a formalized alliance structure like NATO, they can still pose a serious threat to the global order and the stability it has created for the last 80 years. So that was it for today's video, guys. I would love to know whether you think China's allies really pose a threat to the current global order, or whether their strength is overblown. Let me know by leaving a comment down below. I personally think that the world is becoming increasingly unstable, and the rise of a second power center that rivals the Western one is what's causing the instability. If you enjoyed this video, you'll love this video I made recently about how the war in Gaza exposes the decline of American strength. Anyway, leave a like if you enjoyed the content, subscribe if you want to see more. I upload videos like these every week. See you in the next one.